Hi, my name is Tim Cason, and I'm a consultant with T&G and NVIDIA Advisory Board member.
Hi, I'm Linda Abbott. I am also a consultant with T&G and an NVIDIA Advisory Board member.
And as you can see, Linda and I are coming to you in this new format for Tips of the Week. In the past, we've typically done these in written format, but we want to introduce this new mode so that we can break content up into more digestible pieces. Don't worry, we will still continue to do a blend of written and video formats for these Tips of the Week, but just wanting to create some more variety so it's approachable to a big group of people when it comes to these snippets of topics that we're going to address. And so, Linda, what is the first one we want to tackle?
Yeah, so the first topic that we want to talk about is something that comes up a lot when we are working with clients. We discuss this a lot at our most recent convention, and that is the idea of one team versus two teams. So we know, and what we teach is that the research supports having one team that responds to the full spectrum of risk. What we also know is that some schools still have more than one team, and I think we're actually seeing a trend towards going sort of backwards to having two teams that sort of respond to different levels of risk in different ways. Tim, you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, research shows that one team is the most appropriate model. I think right after the Virginia Tech massacre, we saw this huge increase in behavioral intervention teams coming on board, specifically in higher education. And they're also continuing to grow in the K-12 space as well. But at the initial onset after Virginia Tech, they were really focused on threats. And so they were threat assessment teams looking at those high level risks of harms to self or harm to others. And then the field started to move towards behavioral intervention teams, which was a blended approach of looking at both low level behaviors and those high level behaviors. And then I think more recently, primarily because of the COVID-19 pandemic, we're seeing teams split out into two separate teams. We have what maybe is called a care team addressing low level concerns, food insecurity, housing insecurity, adjustment issues, distressed mood, and then a BIT or a threat assessment team addressing high level concerns of harm to self or harm to others. But really what we have there is a BIT over here and a threat assessment team over here. And research shows that we can't continue to treat these items as separate entities, right? These low level behaviors are on the pathway towards these high level behaviors. And so we want to address them at the lowest level possible.
Yeah, so over the next few weeks, we are going to be coming at you in this format with these videos, kind of breaking this down and explaining what we know to be true about why one team is preferable. And we're going to give you some really tangible examples and help you, hopefully, to make any adjustments you might need to make on your own campus. So we look forward to talking with you more about this topic, and we also look forward to hearing your feedback about this new format for Tips of the Week. So we will be coming to you again very soon. Thank you.
Thank you all. Hi, my name is Tim Cason, and I'm a consultant with T&G and NVIDIA Advisory Board member.
Hi, my name is Linda Abbott. I'm a consultant with T&G and an NVIDIA Advisory Board member.
And Linda and I are coming to you today with our second video in the series of addressing this whole concept of one team versus two teams when we're looking at behavioral intervention team strategies. And Linda, I think a really great place to start in this discussion to cue us up for the rest of this series is to look at what are the common teams we see on campuses and what are just some definitional terms about those teams we need to understand in order to understand the scope of what those teams address. And so when we're working with clients, some of the most common ones we hear about are academic early alert teams, care/behavioral intervention teams, and threat assessment teams. And so when we look at academic alert teams, what we mean by those groups of individuals are teams or staff that are receiving referrals for individuals that are struggling academically, anything from attendance or grade-related issues. Oftentimes, these teams are aimed at retention. So reaching out to students once these issues have started to occur, figure out what's going on, and then helping them get caught back up so that they can maintain their academic progression and be retained into the next semester. One of the big things I think that goes unnoticed about these academic early alert teams is it's actually oftentimes not a formal team. It's not a team that is coming together regularly and meeting to discuss proactively who is on their radar. It's more of a triggering or initiation for some type of academic advising process to proactively reach out after likely a faculty member submits a referral. And so there's less structure with those teams.
Absolutely. And I think when we think about these more proactive, formalized teams, that's when we really think about care and bit teams. And we, as we always say, use those terms interchangeably. But that's really our teams that we have that are getting all of those referrals for students who are coming on the radar for any variety of reasons. These are the teams that are meeting weekly, sometimes bi-weekly, but mostly weekly. And that's where we spend most of our time in training and teaching and talking about is this more comprehensive bit or care team. And then I think the third team that you mentioned is that threat assessment team. And what we see with threat assessment teams when that is functioning separate from your care or your bit team is a much more narrowly focused team. This is a team that has that higher threshold. This is getting those referrals for only students that are already at elevated or critical on the risk rubric. There's really often not a regular standing meeting for these. It's much more reactive. And so over the next few weeks, as we talk about this more, we're going to talk about why we feel like all of that really falls under this one umbrella of bit or care.
Right. And I think what we see sometimes is if we use just care team, they're misusing that term and only responding to low-level cases. And then the challenge with threat assessment, to your point, is we're asking less practiced individuals respond to the highest risk situations, which creates some challenges. Right. And so over the next few videos, we're going to focus specifically on the three areas that we see some of the challenges falling in: structural challenges, process challenges, and then quality assurance and assessment challenges.
So we look forward to talking to you more about those very soon. Thank you. Hi, I'm Linda Abbott. I'm a consultant with T&G and an EBITDA advisory board member.
And hi, my name is Tim Cason. I am also a consultant with T&G and also an EBITDA advisory board member. And we're coming to you today in our third video of our series addressing the concept of one team versus two team as it relates to behavioral intervention strategies. And so as we queued up last time, Linda, we want to talk about some of the structural challenges that are created by having multiple teams. And I think the first and one of the most obvious is the actual membership of multiple teams. Because we know that certain departments need to be represented in both a care low-level space as well as a threat assessment high-level space like mental health, police, public safety, security, student conduct, and then a senior administrator like a dean of students of some kind. And so when we have these multiple teams, one of the biggest challenges is that we're creating duplicative work for staff or departments. And what I mean by that is we're either asking the same staff member to go to multiple meetings, sometimes to talk about the same student just in different capacities, or we're asking a singular department to be represented on these separate teams by separate individuals, which I think can naturally create some disconnect or inequitable delivery of information and services from those departments. And so while it often comes from a good place of wanting to minimize the work on staff and or departments, we're actually just likely doubling the work, whether it's the same staff member going to both meetings or different staff members going to these separate meetings. It's duplicative work.
Absolutely. And Tim, along those same lines, when we have these different teams and we've got potentially different representation from these departments, sometimes we even have different chairs of these teams, right. Which causes its own operational difficulties. Different people run things in different ways, have different leadership skills and styles. And so sometimes that can cause some issues from a structural standpoint, and that will lead into more process, which we'll get into next time. But I think that's another thing that we see. And then I think another really big issue that we see is we then have a need for 2 policy and procedure manuals.
Yeah.
We see teams often struggling with having one and keeping that one policy and procedure manual up to date. And so when you have 2 teams, you now have 2 different policy and procedure manuals you need to be staying on top of, making sure that they're updated, and making sure that they aren't conflicting with each other in some way.
Right. And speaking to each other about and articulating how information and cases are transferred to each other, which I
Absolutely.
think is a really unique challenge, and challenge that we'll address when we get to the process section in our next video, of just some of the process elements that become difficult when we're addressing this through a 2-team model.
Absolutely. When our structure is separate, it's going to lead to procedural differences and challenges, and we will talk to you about those next week.
Thank y'all so much.
Thank you.
Hi, my name's Tim Cason, and I'm a consultant with TNG and M.Ed Advisory Board member.
Hi, I'm Linda Abbott. I'm a consultant with TNG and an M.Ed Advisory Board member.
And Linda and I are coming to you today with our 4th video in our series of addressing the concept of 1 team versus 2 teams as it relates to behavioral intervention team strategies. And so last time we queued up that we were going to be really focusing on some of the process elements. So how we get referrals in, how we assess them, and then how we respond to them in that whole process. And so when we have a bifurcated team model, 1 team addressing low level, 1 team addressing high level, which is the common structure we see, the first thing that really pops out to me as one of those challenges is the impact on reporting culture, because we're decentralizing our referral process, and we oftentimes may be asking our community members who are just seeing something of concern to first evaluate, is this a low-level concern or is this a high-level concern? And so when we put that onus on our community members to determine which team something needs to be sent to, we're actually going to likely have a negative impact on our reporting culture, because they may become overwhelmed or not understand which they're supposed to send it to. And so then they just don't do it altogether. And so really we want to encourage a centralized reporting system and a centralized team where these referrals are coming into. But let's say we still have that 2-team model. Once we get those referrals in, we know that the 3-phase process starts with data gathering, assessment, and then interventions. And so when we have 2 separate teams, we're actually siloing our data gathering process and siloing our intervention process, because we're asking a particular group to engage in that data gathering and then use that limited data to develop their interventions. But we saw this was one of the primary challenges when it came to Virginia Tech and so many other tragedies. There were multiple different groups, multiple different offices, multiple different staffs receiving pieces of information of concern. And so they were just addressing that was brought to their attention, rather than taking a total look at everything going on with the individual, so that they could have an institutional, coordinated, collaborative approach to the entirety of the picture. And we just didn't see that in so many situations. And that's frankly what happens when we have multiple teams, is that siloed information, siloed deployment of interventions. What are your thoughts on that and some other challenges, Linda?
Yeah, I think you make such great points there, Tim. And I think the other piece of that, and one other piece of that we really see with these siloed, once we've siloed this information and we've got these 2 different teams functioning, we really see things coming much more complicated and unclear as to when does a case move from one team to another. So for instance, if someone is referred on a Tuesday and the risk assigned is mild, but we gather more information through our process, and through that information gathering realize, you know what, this may actually be elevated. Risk is not static. How do we know when to send the student to this team versus this team, and then how do we share that information back and forth? It just complicates things in a way that is unnecessary. And when we're able to have one team responding to that full spectrum of risk, we avoid that complication and that issue. There are obviously some more process elements we want to talk about, but we want to keep these short, so we'll get to those in our next video.
Thank y'all so much.
Hi, I'm Linda Abbott. I'm a consultant with T&G and an M.Ed advisory board member.
And my name is Tim Cason. I am a consultant with T&G and also an M.Ed advisory board member. Linda and I are coming to you in our next video involving the series around one team versus two teams as it relates to behavioral intervention team implementation and strategies. And in our last video, we introduced to you some of the concepts that are challenging for having a two-team model with process elements. So how we receive referrals and then process through them to deploy interventions. And as we talked about last time, Linda, when we have this separate model, the process of receiving information is siloed, and then deploying interventions is siloed, because we're asking a group of individuals to focus on Tim's referral on Wednesday to talk about his low-level stuff, and then come together on Thursday, a separate group, to talk about his high-level stuff. And that's just not how risk works. Everything feeds into each other. But one of the process challenges that I think that also creates is documentation issues. And so when we're using our electronic record keeping systems, we want to keep them as user-friendly and simple as possible so that it's easier to put information in and then pull information out for data gathering purposes down the road. But when we have a two-team model, how do we document that? Do we have separate case types that we put certain pieces of information in? Or do we have one full case, but we're only being made aware of the pieces of information that relate to that level of risk that the team's managing? I just think it creates some of those challenges of knowing where to store it, how do we store it, and then who has access to it. And it's much simpler to just keep it as a one team who has access to all the case files.
I agree. I mean, I think one of the challenges that we see is time. We're limited on time. We're already struggling to stay on top of our notes and our documentation. Now, when we have two teams, we have two separate places we need to do that. I think in a similar way, we look at other things that we already struggle with, which are things like marketing and training and resources for two teams. So when we have one team, we're able to market that team to our community as one team. We're not trying to have two different marketing strategies. Same thing with training. It's really important for our teams to be staying well trained, staying on top of their training process each year. And that requires resources. So that's all kind of ties in together. That's something we hear a lot from clients is, we want to do more training, but we don't have the resources, or we want to expand this and we don't have the resources. Having two teams means you need that much more marketing, that much more training, that much more resources. So when you're able to combine and have one team, it makes all of that much easier and far less complicated. So hopefully this gives you all some insight into the why of why the research supports this from a process standpoint.
And then next week, we are going to go ahead and tackle some of the assessment challenges by having multiple teams.
See you then. Hi, I'm Linda Abbott. I'm a consultant with T&G and an M.Ed advisory board member.
My name is Tim Cason. I am a consultant with T&G and also an M.Ed advisory board member. And we are coming to you with our 6th video in our series of addressing the concept of one team versus two teams as it pertains to behavioral intervention, team implementation, and strategies. And really what we wanted to focus on with this video is some of the assessment challenges and quality assurance challenges that are created by having two teams. We just talked about the process elements, and one of them specifically being data and documentation. Where do we keep data? How many different case types do we have, and how do we store it? And we know that when we put bad or difficult data into our systems, when we try to pull that out, we're going to have bad data to assess or difficult data to understand. And so that's a huge challenge that's created in the assessment piece by having multiple teams, is not only understanding the data for multiple teams that we're putting in, but also just the administrative hurdles of having to now produce multiple reports for the team and its efforts. Best practice shows that we should be issuing end of the year or end of the semester reports to just document the good work and the effort that these individuals are doing. And now we're creating the need to do that for two separate teams, which I think is an administrative challenge that doesn't always get considered when people move in the direction of developing two teams. What other challenges do you see in this area, Linda?
Yeah, I think another big issue, which really ties in well to what you were just talking about, is this need to audit your team on a regular basis to kind of look at how is the team functioning? Are you in alignment with best practices? So I think out of the gate, having multiple teams would be considered not in alignment with best practices. Best practice is this overarching team, one team that responds to the full spectrum of risk, right? So I think that's the most obvious piece of that. I think the other piece is when you need to audit your team, auditing one team is just easier than auditing two. So looking at how you're functioning, how you're working together, how things are going with your team overall in this assessment process is really important, and it's going to be complicated by this multiple team model. So again, the best practice of having one team is going to simplify so much of this work.
Agreed. And so in our next videos, what we're going to do is talk to you all about some of the strategies for managing one team, as well as if you can't move forward with having just one team, some strategies for managing two. So we'll see you next time.
See you soon.